I am stuck with the unenviable task of reviewing a film adaptation of a book that's not only great, but unique. No one writes like George V. Higgins. The Friends of Eddie Coyle is his debut novel, and it's a whopper. Not necessarily as a thriller, although it's a good one, but as a three-penny opera of singing, swerving dialogue everyone is copied without really getting at its guts. Higgins worked as an attorney for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, for the feds, and for himself, and wrote plenty of newspaper work along the way. That's the kind of on-the-job training you're not going to get at film school writing workshops or your local laptop-friendly coffee shop. But let's judge the movie that is, not the one that might have been. On the one hand, the 1973 adaptation of The Friends of Eddie Coyle is good. It must surely have influenced a generation of heist movies, because I spotted bits of this film that have been cherry-picked for Catherine Bigelow's Point Break or Christopher Nolan's Batman films, Michael Mann's Heat, and so forth. Even Sidney Lumet must have been paying attention when he made Dog Day Afternoon a few years after Eddie Coyle was released. This movie looks great not because it looks great, but because it doesn't look great. Everything is shot at shoulder height with a plain lighting and undressed locations. No effort is made to gussy up the drab and depressing fact that is the city of Boston. Sorry, Adam. Kudos to anyone who deliberately points a camera at that travesty of brutalist architecture, Government Center, possibly the ugliest pile of crap ever erected by the hand of man. Kudos for shooting the parking lots and the back roads and bar rooms of that sad, ugly pig of a city without first smearing a little lipstick over it. Seriously, sorry, Adam. Then, of course, there's Robert Mitchum. I could watch Robert Mitchum eat a bowl of soup for 2 hours and get my money's worth. He plays the title character, Eddie Fingers Coyle, as a guy half smart, half stupid, and all nice. His friends are gun dealers, police informants, bank robbers, and one cop with an open ear but a short attention span. Eddie has a lot on his mind, not least of all that prison hearing coming up soon. It could mean going back into the pen for a few years. He wants to rat out his friends to save himself, but not rat them out too much because they're, well, his friends. Or at least members of a private code of respect only he seems to be following. His friends do not. As the pieces of the plot fall into place, you realize, in that way that George V. Higgins is so good at, that the ship is sinking and only the meanest, fastest rats are going to get out alive. And maybe Eddie won't or can't because he's a rat, but maybe not mean enough or fast enough. Good as the movie is, thrilling as the heist scenes are, the movie suffers by comparison. Director Peter Yatess is dutiful, but seems to have a tin ear for Higgins' best asset, the dialogue. The normally great Peter Boyle plays the most important character in the movie, plot-wise, whose motor mouth fabrications in the book are thinned here to a watery minimum. And Yates directs dialogue like line readings, with actors reciting lifelessly or wandering off in actorly directions that miss the rhythm in the words. Higgins' ear was tuned pitch perfect to the language of the 9-to-5 and the 30-year mortgage, the ex-wives and the alimonies, the I got a roof that leaks and a kid won't stay in school, the language of a working class that stands aside its own slow death and observes with wit. Higgins' characters talk about their shabby lives with the gallows humor of a forensic pathologist dissecting his own cooling corpse. They catalog their shortcomings and note carefully their own character faults. One reviewer called Higgins' plot a blurrily perceived skeleton within the monsoon of dialogue, this being meant as a criticism but which sounds like a compliment to me. A more recent and more successful adaptation of Higgins is Killing Them Softly, directed by Andrew Dominic and based on the book Cogan's Trade, unread by me. Dominic neatly transferred Higgins to the screen by lifting whole passages of the book's dialogue verbatim and drawing out the speed and rhythm within, directing the actors as if the dialogue is being hurled between them or tossed nervously hand to hand. Dominic acknowledges the dialogue as a physical presence, as a main character really, and behaves accordingly. The Friends of Eddie Coyle, missing this opportunity, is good. It's really good, but it could have been great. All right, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Barassa.
Yes, indeed.
Good to have everyone back. Good to be talking about Boston again. Is that a good accent, Joe?
I have no idea. I'm a Bronx boy. What the hell do I know?
Hey, listen, I think Billy has some really great points about what's going on here in the Friends of Eddie Coyle. So let's get right to it. So, Billy, I could definitely get behind with what you're saying here. Because I think what's going on with George Higgins' work, it was the same thing Hollywood and these directors struggled with Elmore Leonard's work for a very long time, where they weren't really getting the gist of where the story's at and the story's in its characters and in its dialogue. And I've watched so many people fumble through Leonard's work up until the 90s when Barry Sonnenfeld did Get Shorty, and then Steven Soderbergh did Out of Sight, and Tarantino did Jackie Brown, which is a really good movie, and they started to get it, you know. And what goes on here, I think, with what Peter Yates is doing is that he doesn't get that, and it's like you say, it's like a read through, man, with the lines. It feels like a television show, a 70s television show at times, and that's kind of disappointing because there's a lot here. That's one thing I could recognize watching this movie was that there's a lot of meat here. There's really good characters. And here's what's really disappointing about Yates's job, Bill, is that he has so many great character actors to work with. I mean, let's just put aside the fact that he's working with one of the greats in Robert Mitchum, but I mean, you got guys like Alex Rocco and Peter Boyle popping up, James Tolkien. I mean, these guys are great character actors. They're all right there for the taking, and the film unfortunately falls flat, and that's disappointing to me, man, because there's a lot here.
I kind of feel that it does, and I was really surprised because I was prepared. I was like, you cannot fuck up, you can't fuck up Higgins' dialogue, right? And the strangest thing to me, like, it was right at the beginning. By the way, you forgot James Tolkien, who is
oh boy,
Back to the Future.
Yeah, he's great. I mean, and there's just, I mean, everybody in this movie. I mean, I love like the way every character looked in this movie, and I like the way they, they sounded, but they just, it just wasn't.
I think they, the thing is, I think they went for a focus on the plot. They focused on the heist aspect,
right,
and the thriller aspect,
right.
And in Higgins, like that comment that reviewer made, that the plot is barely perceived through a monsoon of dialogue. That's to its credit, not its detriment.
Right.
Some of my favorite movies are those where the plot is revealed to me over time because I have to put the pieces together. That's right. Okay to do that. And Higgins does it through dialogue. And then in the movie adaptation, I just think the director didn't hear the poetry of the language that this guy was writing.
Right. And something.
So he directs around it instead of, planting that camera right in people's faces and saying, you're going to tell this story through your dialogue.
Well, he's coming off of, I think, a success here because the year before, he did a movie called The Hot Rock, which is a heist movie with Robert Redford. Okay. And, that movie works in that capacity, Billy, where, you like the movement of the film could tell the story, and the heist and all the action could tell the story. But I don't think that this should be the same case here for this one, obviously. No. And that's why it falls flat. Joe, I know you're a big fan of this movie. I mean, you were very excited about it.
Yeah, I like the movie. I see certainly what you guys are talking about, and I'm a huge fan of the book. I like the movie, to be honest with you. Yeah. I don't mind that that he's underplaying the dialogue. I think it's kind of a neat take on it because overplaying the dialogue and overemphasizing that language. I don't know. Sometimes, they do. I'm split here because I do agree with you too that Killing Them Softly is a much better take and a much nuanced understanding of the way that Higgins writes his dialogue.
Yeah, the characters really breathe in that movie, Joe.
Yeah, they really get it, and and it's really about color of the language and all that. Right. But at the same point, I thought it was kind of interesting to see this colorful language just underplayed. You know what I mean? Like, and you really gotta. It's like someone's talking in a whisper, and you gotta lean in to hear what they're saying.
Yeah, but the line readings are flat, man. It's not just that it's underplayed. Yeah, it's that it's flat. Like, I don't mind. You don't have to do friggin' Shakespeare in the Park or anything. You can just. But it's like they're saying it, but they don't hear how it's supposed to be said.
There's no rhythm to it.
No.
And I agree. I was, when I'd seen the movie several years back and was rewatching it for this. And it's like, there's a lot of interesting choices that the director made cinematically. And it's not the writing. There's something missing here. And it felt like it was the performances. Yeah. And that was it. It was just like the performances were not there. It did feel flat. It just felt like it was a rehearsal or a read through. It just didn't have beyond even what you guys are saying, which is right about there's no rhythm, and it
Yeah.
just it
Yeah,
came
I
off
mean,
like
when
bad acting.
It's a
yeah,
shame. Yeah, and with
it is a shame because when I'm thinking now that I'm running through and just thinking about the way that those characters played it, in even Brad Pitt, James Gandolfini, and the other guy who plays the younger kid who's
Oh, he's great. He's sort of
yeah.
insecure and a little bit like whiny sounding. Like,
Yeah. Oh
yeah.
my God. Yeah. And those guys really were emphasizing. Yeah. I mean, I understand what you're
Scott
saying.
McNary is the name.
Still,
Scoot McNairy is the name of that actor. I've seen him in a
yeah.
couple things. He's so good in
He-
that movie. It's
Yeah,
ridiculous.
he was
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
stand.
Still, I enjoyed this picture a lot, man. I think
Fun.
it's really, there's so much good stuff going on in here. And
uh,
it is like, it's almost like I'm seeing through the movie to the dialogue that I really dig it. And just listening to your review there, Billy, I realized, you were saying what a nice guy Eddie was, and I was like, oh, nice guy Eddie. Holy shit! I'm the,
yeah, I thought of that too.
it's funny because
This fucker's back.
He's all over it. He's all over this stuff, man.
Of course he is. And Billy is right because you could see, I mean, the one thing you could compliment Yates on is that, he's influential here and you see bits of what Michael Mann does and especially Thief and Heat. You see the Friends of Eddie Coyle. You see how Yates had influenced some of these guys. Lumet's Dog Day Afternoon, definitely. Billy, definitely, and quite a few others. And that's awesome.
Well, to be fair, the cinema itself, like Adam, you were saying, the cinema aspect of the movie is great. I mean, I love these 70s movies, man. I love when modern directors like Nolan or Fincher go back to basics. They put the camera at eye level. They, there's an unglamorous, rough, you can feel the texture of the rooms and the suits that these people are wearing. Like everything is so naturalistic. Like there's this great shot in the movie where the first heist that gets fucked up, they have the banker waiting in the back of the car. Someone gets shot. They run out into the back of the car, and the next shot starts on a close-up of the banker through the back window of the car. One of the bankers jumps in, hits him over the head with a gun, and the car pulls away. And so you get this beautiful, simple shot that starts at a close-up and ends with a wide shot of the cars pulling away, and the camera hasn't moved at all. And I just love that filmmaking, man.
I do.
So it's like he's a really competent visual director. He's really competent at pacing and everything. But there are just some choices in there that are bad, and the lack of attention to the music of that dialogue, I think, just knocks the movie down a peg, unfortunately.
Well, I think that had they captured that, this would be a classic movie.
Absolutely, yeah.
A lot of people probably have never even heard of this movie. People would be talking about it like Dog Day Afternoon if they captured that. That's just the one piece that they missed.
Unfortunately, it stands at like a fair movie as opposed to being a great one.
Exactly.
If I would have, I mean, hindsight, I wasn't even born in '73, but if I was to give advice to anyone trying to make that movie, I'd say look at the screwball comedies of the 30s and 40s, right? That dialogue moves so fast. It didn't have to be in your face. It didn't have to be overplayed. The filmmaking was still very basic, 3/4 views of people and all that. And you can, even in '73, you've got this beautiful book full of this amazing dialogue. Treat it like a screwball comedy, direct those actors to fire that dialogue back and forth like they're Cary Grant and Irene Dunn.
I'll tell you, I'd like to see someone take a stab at this movie again.
But not a bad idea. I'd like to see them make some other George Higgins books. I thought Killing Them Softly was brilliant. I was blown away when I saw that.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it took decades. You're talking about we're 40 years later from when Yates made this movie, and the whole concept of what dialogue is in films have completely changed. And like I said, when in the 90s, when people started to, it started with me with Elmore Leonard with Get Shorty with Barry Sonnenfeld. I think he really understood how a Leonard novel supposed to sound on screen, and then Soderbergh and Tarantino put an exclamation point on that. And I think that's why a movie like Killing Softly, which was just done, recently, is so good, because I think we're at a point now where we could really understand how this stuff is supposed to sound on screen after the 40 past years of filmmaking. I mean, listen, what was different to me was just like you're at a point in film right here where Robert Mitchum is probably saying fuck for the first time on screen. You know, I mean, that was weird to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
also could watch Robert Mitchum just swear at people for 2 hours and feel like I got my money's worth.
That would be great. That would be great.
Two things to note. Number one, the first character mentioned in the book and one of the main characters in the movie is Jackie Brown. So,
right.
You know, obviously Tarantino has, and when you read Higgins, you realize how much Tarantino lifted from his dialogue style, you know.
Well, Elmore Leonard did,
right.
you know, and
Elmore Leonard was around long before.
He was writing westerns and stuff for a while.
He did the 50s movie. What's the 50s western show?
The 310 to Yuma.
Yeah.
Well, Elmore Leonard did call this the best crime novel ever written.
Yeah.
And Norman Mailer was singing this guy's praises as well. I mean, just that he came out of the gate with this this novel as a first novel is remarkable.
And I read on that too, and it made a lot more sense after I found out that he wrote about 17 novels before this that he discarded and he never released. And I'm like,
good for him.
Well, I'm like, okay, if you want your first novel to be great, write 17 other novels first, I guess, you know.
That's all it takes.
Yeah.
Adam, you've read Higgins? You've read this novel?
I haven't read the novel, no.
Oh, you got it, man. It's
definitely
it's a great experience, man. You got to check that out.
I'm reading one right now, accidentally, purely coincidentally. I started it before I remembered that I was supposed to do this, but it's called The Rat on Fire, and it's absolutely brilliant. It's about these guys who want to burn down houses for the insurance money, so they catch rats and douse them in gasoline and then light them on fire and set them loose.
Why are we? I mean, this guy has only 2 novels that have been adapted into screenplays, and that's The Friends of Eddie Coyle and Killing Them Softly, 40 years apart.
That is nuts.
Yeah. Which is amazing. And you guys are talking about this guy like, I mean, we should.
Well, I just read one that would make a great film about, and it was written in probably the late 90s called At End of Day, which is another like low life. I'm pretty sure Boston. If it's not Boston, it's definitely New England, about the black market pills trade.
Nice.
Yeah, which is probably about 10 years ahead of its time as far as it being a hot button issue, and just seeing how these guys, it's all about this crime ring that's going around doctor to doctor and picking up prescriptions and selling them on the market. Yeah,
he was wildly ahead of his time, just in the way that he told stories without exposition, really. I mean, his books, I haven't read one yet that has any real exposition in it. It's all done through dialogue, you know?
Yeah.
But also I commented on this in the review, but it deserves elaboration. His presentation of the characters and the world that they inhabit is so true to how life actually functions that there's not bad guys and good guys. The way people behave is so much just a part of where they grew up and who they knew, and you end up making choices in life based off of your influences and all this stuff. And the characters they behave so naturalistically. It's hard. His books come off almost more like social comedies than they do thrillers half the time, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, well there's such a characterization involved, but the characterizations don't turn into caricature.
No.
Which is remarkable.
They're exaggerated just right.
Yeah. I mean, it should be noted that, I think you didn't mention it in your review there, Billy, that he was working as an assistant to the U.S. attorney at the time, and that's where he's pulling a lot of this stuff, and a lot of it's taken right from life, and I'm sure taken.
You can't write the way he does without sitting in a lawyer's office, 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, and seeing the knuckleheads that walk in and out your office door, all of us have spent a little bit of time on things like jury duty and going through courts and having to deal with the cops and everything, and his books live and breathe the daily life of that existence. It's pretty amazing.
what was pretty amazing too about the film is that when Robert Mitchum was preparing for the part, he wanted to be introduced to Whitey Bulger, who I guess it was before it was Whitey Bulger, before he became like this big, the crime, whatever,
the boogeyman.
And George Higgins was warning him against actually doing that, and now that is a bit of dialogue that I would love to.
You would love to be at the diner, listening to
like
that
to be a fly on the wall, listening to George V. Higgins trying to talk Robert Mitchum out of going to meet Whitey Bulger. Like, that's a bit of freaking dialogue.
Awesome.
That is.
Yeah, it's worth noting too that Killing Them Softly was not a big hit, I mean, a lot of critics kind of shit on it, and it was one of those that I avoided watching for a while because it didn't look. The trailers did not make it look very good. They marketed it as a Brad Pitt in a leather jacket kicking ass kind of movie, and then you would go online and you'd read reviews for it, and half the people were saying it was really good, half were saying this is the slowest, dullest, most uninteresting movie ever. And I finally, sometimes you get those split votes on IMDb and Netflix, and it turns out to be a really good movie, and that was the case here. But it's no one fucking saw the movie, so
sometimes the worse the review, the better. It's so funny. When you're reading all this negative. I remember. I mean, it has nothing to do with what we're talking about. But I'm a bit. I mean, we're talking about novelists, so I mean, I guess it kind of can fit in. But I love Bret Easton Ellis, and I went to go see The Informers, which is a screen. It wasn't a novel, but it was a screenplay he did, and it was just getting bashed and bashed and bashed.
Wow.
And I go into the theater, and I was like. It was like some of the most extraordinary 90 minutes I'd had in a film theater in a long time.
That's awesome.
And so Bill, you're absolutely you're dead on like that, man. It's bizarre. It's bizarre what's popular.
It sucks that this guy doesn't have more movies out there, but
that is what is just
it's
Adam. I mean, that's killing me too, because I'm looking at his body of work here. And
I don't get it. I don't get
what's going on. There's got to be something that
he needs to write more about skin tight leotards and aliens from space and giant robots and stuff.
And crime, crime sells though big time.
Crime sells, action sells. Unique dialogue. You would think that Tarantino or any of these Tarantino style filmmakers would have locked in. Although on the other hand, I don't know. It could be the dude. Maybe he doesn't sell off the rights. Maybe he's very, very, very picky about it. The author himself.
Yeah, we can't be certain what the reason is, and I hope it's not because people are unaware. I mean,
there's a couple authors I know of that it's like I read their books and it's like, how is this not optioned and already in production? And then I come to find out it's like, well, the author's just not down with it. He's not looking to get movies made off it.
Right. So how does Killing Them Softly get put together? I mean, because this guy's a young director, right?
He's not young necessarily. He's been around a while.
He has been around a while?
Yeah, he's a New Zealand guy. He did. He's only done a few movies. Chopper with Eric Bana.
Okay, I'm familiar with that.
And The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert.
Oh, he did that.
Love that.
Which is it's another one.
I should know who this guy is then. I'm embarrassed. Sorry,
he's done 3 movies. They're 3 completely different movies from each other, and they're all fucking brilliant.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. There is
and The Assassination of Jesse James is another one. There was no way in hell I was going to see that movie. I just wasn't that interested in it. Like the way they marketed it, I was like, I'm not interested in that.
You know what brought me to The Assassination of Jesse James was Casey Affleck. I mean, I love Casey Affleck.
That's so funny. You love that dude.
I love him, but I really do. I think he's got a scene in Good Will Hunting that I watched many years ago. Like that, I still think about how funny it is because he had this obsession with going upstairs at one of the friends' houses and watching porn. And then he'd come back downstairs and he'd just be sweaty and breathing heavy and try to act real casual. And I thought it was really funny. And so I always and plus I love To Die For. And when you're watching Joaquin Phoenix and Casey Affleck and Nicole Kidman together in that movie, and with Gus Van Sant directing. I mean, that's just extraordinary shit. Yeah, that's like one of the best female performances in the history of cinema. Nicole Kidman in To Die For. But what drew me to the assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford was Affleck. And Billy, I wind up watching this movie like 3 times in one weekend. It was like one of the most hypnotic experiences I've ever had. I just kept putting it on. Like I watched it, put it on again, and then the next day I just kind of put it on in the background, and I would just pop in on it. And it is, and this is a cult movie. You want to talk about cult movies? People are really behind this movie. I mean, some people think it's a work of fucking cinematic genius.
I'm of that group. I think that it is really just one of those little quiet masterpieces.
Yeah, and don't they have like screenings out there in LA for it like all the time? I know a former guest of ours, Pat Healy, who's an excellent actor, is a huge fan of this movie, and like I always see him on Facebook talking about oh, they're doing a screening for this movie, and like he's like more people should be behind this movie. And he wasn't even in the freaking movie, and he's he's totally selling it to everybody. But boy,
hey, there's your theme for the next show, Billy.
What's that?
Andrew Dominic killing him softly, Chopper, and
killing them softly is all the way back in 2012. So I don't know if that qualifies.
But Adam set a new standard tonight by giving us 10.
Yeah, I somehow snuck Ted in there, so
And I didn't even refer to it as a new DVD release review. So as long as it's close, Billy, we 2012, 2013, we could definitely work around.
So
something.
the bar has been set at 2 years in the past.
2 years. 2 years is definitely a new release by any standard.
If it's within the year, I'll say it's a new DVD release movie. If it isn't, then I'll just say we're going to talk about the 2012 film. Whatever.
I have really lowered the bar on.
See what this guy's done, Joe?
No, man, I really do. I enjoy watching this movie, even though it falls a little bit short of the novel, though. Adam, I am a big fan of it. How did you pick it? Is it just the Boston thing, or were you?
This was a movie that was recommended to me by my uncle from Boston years ago, and I watched it, and for all the reasons that it is actually a strong movie, it's just like cinematically, it's really unique and fun, and some great character actors, all the good stuff we talked about. And it didn't even really hit me until the recent viewing that I just watched about the performances. So I had like a more of a stronger memory of it, more like you, Joe, that it's just like a really fun movie from the 70s that blazed some trails. And the fact that it takes place in Boston but doesn't make a big deal of it. It's just
those locations are great, aren't they?
Yeah. I love that. So I love the fact that like you pointed out, government center. It's like, why are you filming at the government center?
No one shoots at government center unless someone's holding a gun to their head.
Yeah,
those shitty banks that they ride.
Right. Watch Thief. Watch Michael Mann's Thief. I'm telling you, his location. What Michael Mann uses as locations in any one of his crime thrillers, it's right out of this shit. I'm telling you right now, he finds the most bizarre places in these big cities that nobody's ever shot at, that just look so different from what you're used to. It's exactly what Michael Mann does, and it's obvious he's a big fan of a film.
My favorite scene in Eddie Coyle is the grocery store, where Robert Mitchum has a shopping cart full of groceries, and that's the gun exchange. I thought that was so great. He was like, put the guns in the bag, put some of the bread on top. Right. Everyone can use bread. Feed the pigeons. Feed the ducks.
Absolutely. And I love the fact that Boston was always kind of the city in the background, and you're in a parking lot, or you're under a bridge somewhere, you're in this gritty, slimy alley.
Right.
And there's the city. You see the city over there on the Charles.
Right.
And just having that sort of framed in the background, and then these gritty locations.
Yeah, I love it, dude. There's something about those 70s crime movies, grit, that it's just like you guys were talking about before. You guys failed to mention John Cassavetes, though. Again, I just need to say, like, the killing of a Chinese bookie is just, It's actually better than this film, you know. And I just watched one pretty recently that I think you guys would enjoy. Prince of the City.
Oh, that's Sidney Lumet.
Yeah, you were talking about
Joe. He did that.
Yeah, I know. It's close enough though. It feels like the 70s. And you guys were talking about Dog Day Afternoon, but I had never seen this Prince of the City. And I put it on.
It's like 4 hours long.
Yeah, I put it on because of a conversation we were having here. Didn't we talk about a Sidney Lumet film?
Yeah, recently? Well, we did 12 Angry Men, so we had.
Oh, there it was. That's why it was on my queue.
Discussion, yeah.
Yeah, there's scenes in that film that are very close, that feel a lot like what's happening here, like just crappy diners on the side of the road. You know,
two from the 70s is The Onion Field.
I haven't seen that.
Yeah, that's a Harold Becker movie. Yeah, with John Savage and James Woods. It's a good one. I think that's in L.A. Have you seen it, Adam?
Oh, sure. Yeah,
that's a Los Angeles film, right?
It's a true story that I believe took place just outside of Bakersfield, or that's where maybe the bodies were done, where the cops were. I can't quite remember, but yeah, it's an LA based story.
Yeah, and you get a young James Woods who's always fantastic, and
Ted Danson, one of his first roles.
Plays one of the cops in that movie. Yeah. Oh my god, that's him and his big head.
Yes.
That's
freaking pompadour.
Guys, anything else on Yates or the Friends of Eddie Coyle? I do want to mention Peter Yates movie that I want to turn our listeners onto because after looking through his work the past few days, I am a big fan of a movie he did in the 80s called An Innocent Man with Tom Selleck, and it's a great prison movie, and that's a subject too, guys, that we could definitely get into in the future too, is prison movies. We haven't gone anywhere near that, and that's a really good subject. But
he did he? No, he didn't. I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead. Escape from Alcatraz. It's with Eastwood, yeah.
But no, that's with Mr. Eastwood, who we're going to be talking about just a minute or two. So that's that's a great movie too, Joe. That's the 70s, man.
I love that one. Man.
That was like as a kid, my first Clint Eastwood experience, basically. And
me too.
It wasn't Every Which Way But Loose.
No, it was actually Escape from Alcatraz. Believe it or not, that's the one. It's like, wow, this is such a great. I loved it. It's one of those films they played on TV a lot, like
absolutely
Sunday afternoons at 4, like a Thursday at 6, and I always would have it on every time.
Yeah,
me too, man.
When I was a kid, you'd always get a steady diet of Dirty Harry, Escape from Alcatraz, and either Every Which Way But Loose or Any Which Way You Can.
All classics.
They were all.
I tried to watch Any Which Way But Loose with the kids not too long ago, and it just did not work. It was not working. You
really gotta pull yourself away outside of your brain and body and just kind of roll with the stupidity and that.
Well, it's not even that. Like it's just so slow. Like it's just I don't know how we watched that film.
Very different, huh? The pacing.
Yeah, it was crazy, man. I mean, it just took forever for anything to happen, and that doesn't work.
That is true, Adam. Because if you go back and watch any of they're all longer. Like even the Cannonball Run, at times you're just like, you'll go through like these 5-10 minute periods of just like nothing really going on.
It's amazing. I mean, obviously, pacing in movies has changed across the board. I mean, look at how Eddie Coyle starts. You have this whole sequence of this guy just walking out, getting into his car, and it's all like through the bushes. It's really cool. But like nowadays, a bank heist movie you would just jump into the action. Absolutely. But comedy specifically I just don't understand how by today's standards, how any comedy like prior to like 85 was ever even funny. What did I see just the other day? I saw a clip from Mr. Mom because I was catching up with Michael Keaton here, and
you better be careful.
He keeps popping up, Michael Keaton, Adam. I'm telling you, man, because we were talking about him on the Larry David show.
Yeah,
and we did Night Shift last season.
Sure.
That keeps popping up on our radar.
I love the dude, and I was, the new movies coming out, catching up, and I watched a clip from Mr. Mom, which was, one of my favorite movies, one of my favorite Michael Keaton performances, and it blew me away how the slow, dragging pacing of it. It just is not what I remember.
It's shot like a drama. It's almost shot like it's paced like a drama.
Seriously.
Yeah. My kids did enjoy that one.
That's an interesting point, Joe, that they're shot like dramas. Like, because
there's build up, there's character arcs and build up, and now now we get now we get CGI teddy bears. You know what
exactly.
I mean?
Foul mouth teddy bears, Joe.
Yeah,
dirty, dirty
bears.
Yeah. All right, guys, let's do Mystic River next. Mr. Clint Eastwood is on the table finally. I'm very excited. Joe Christiana is going to give you his introduction. Do it, my friend.
Himself, but not rat them out too much because they're, well, his friends. Or at least members of a private code of respect only he seems to be following. His friends do not. As the pieces of the plot fall into place, you realize, in that way that George B. Higgins is so good at, that the ship is sinking and only the meanest, fastest rats are going to get out alive. And maybe Eddie won't or can't because he's a rat, but maybe not mean enough or fast enough. Good as the movie is, thrilling as the heist scenes are, the movie suffers by comparison. Director Peter Yatess is dutiful, but seems to have a tin ear for Higgins' best asset, the dialogue. The normally great Peter Boyle plays the most important character in the movie, plot-wise, whose motor mouth fabrications in the book are thinned here to a watery minimum. And Yates directs dialogue like line readings, with actors reciting lifelessly or wandering off in actorly directions that miss the rhythm in the words. Higgins' ear was tuned pitch perfect to the language of the 9 to 5 and the 30-year mortgage, the ex-wives and the alimonies, the I got a roof that leaks and a kid won't stay in school, the language of a working... All right, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Barassa.
Yes, indeed.
Good to have everyone back. Good to be talking about Boston again. Is that a good accent, Joe?
I have no idea. I'm a Bronx boy. What the hell do I know?
Hey, listen, I think Billy has some really great points about what's going on here in the Friends of Eddie Coyle. So let's get right to it. So, Billy, I could definitely get behind with what you're saying here. Because I think what's going on with George Higgins' work, it was the same thing Hollywood and these directors struggled with Elmore Leonard's work for a very long time, where they weren't really getting the gist of where the story's at and the story's in its characters and in its dialogue. And I've watched so many people fumble through Leonard's work up until the 90s when Barry Sonnenfeld did Get Shorty, and then Steven Soderbergh did Out of Sight, and Tarantino did Jackie Brown, which is a really good movie, and they started to get it.
In class that stands aside its own slow death and observes with wit. Higgins' characters talk about their shabby lives with the gallows humor of a forensic pathologist dissecting his own cooling corpse. They catalog their shortcomings and note carefully their own character faults. One reviewer called Higgins' plot a blurrily perceived skeleton within the monsoon of dialogue, this being meant as a criticism, but which sounds like a compliment to me. A more recent and more successful adaptation of Higgins is Killing Them Softly, directed by Andrew Dominic and based on the book Kogan's Trade, unread by me. Dominic neatly transferred Higgins to the screen by lifting whole passages of the book's dialogue verbatim and drawing out the speed and rhythm within, directing the actors as if the dialogue is being hurled between them or tossed nervously hand to hand. Dominic acknowledges the dialogue as a physical presence, as a main character really, and behaves accordingly. The Friends of Eddie Coyle missing this opportunity is good, it's really good, but it could have been great. When he made Dog Day Afternoon a few years after Eddie Coyle was released. This movie looks great not because it looks great, but because it doesn't look great. Everything is shot at shoulder height with a plain lighting and undressed locations. No effort is made to gussy up the drab and depressing fact that is the city of Boston. Sorry, Adam. Kudos to anyone who deliberately points a camera at that travesty of brutalist architecture, Government Center, possibly the ugliest pile of crap ever erected by the hand of man. Kudos for shooting the parking lots and the back roads and bar rooms of that sad, ugly pig of a city without first smearing a little lipstick over it. Seriously, sorry, Adam. Then, of course, there's Robert Mitchum. I could watch Robert Mitchum eat a bowl of soup for 2 hours and get my money's worth. He plays the title character, Eddie Fingers Coyle, as a guy half smart, half stupid, and all nice. His friends are gun dealers, police informants, bank robbers, and one cop with an open ear but a short attention span. Eddie has a lot on his mind, not least of all that prison hearing coming up soon. It could mean going back into the pen for a few years. He wants to rat out his friends to save him. I am stuck with the unenviable task of reviewing a film adaptation of a book that's not only great, but unique. No one writes like George V. Higgins. The Friends of Eddie Coyle is his debut novel, and it's a whopper. Not necessarily as a thriller, although it's a good one, but as a three-penny opera of singing, swerving dialogue everyone is copied without really getting at its guts. Higgins worked as an attorney for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, for the feds, and for himself, and wrote plenty of newspaper work along the way. That's the kind of on-the-job training you're not going to get at film school writing workshops or your local laptop-friendly coffee shop. But let's judge the movie that is, not the one that might have been. On the one hand, the 1973 adaptation of The Friends of Eddie Coyle is good. It must surely have influenced a generation of heist movies, because I spotted bits of this film that have been cherry-picked for Catherine Bigelow's Point Break or Christopher Nolan's Batman films, Michael Mann's Heat, and so forth. Even Sidney Lumet must have been paying attention